Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, where we take a look inside the lives of the accomplished and successful businessmen and women. We'll get up close and personal with the founders of booming startups. So lean in and prepare to carry away something to skyrocket your own business. Please subscribe to our show and do leave us a review. It means a lot to us. Now, here's your host, Rajiv.
Hey listeners, welcome to the Entrepreneur Talk Show. This is a show where we talk about entrepreneurship and speak to great founders, investors and startups. Today we have with us Snehal Patel, co-founder at MyDoc. MyDoc is a telemedicine solution that connects users to healthcare professionals and the rest of their care coordination platform. This includes pharmacies, lab data and insurers to ensure that patients and users are provided access to the broadest healthcare network. Welcome Snehal.
Hi, Rajiv.
All right, just a brief intro before we move on. Snehal co-founded MyDoc and is responsible for the business strategy and execution. He is also currently a managing director of Snehal Partners, a Singapore-based investment company. He was the senior VP at Chandler Corporation, investment fund based in Singapore. And prior to moving to Singapore, he practiced law at New York. He's a MD from Columbia University and a JD from Columbia Law School, and is also a featured speaker at the 2011 Milken Global Conference. Welcome, Snehal, again, and do fill in the gaps, if any, in the intro, and let us know what's going on in your world today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you did a great job, Rajiv.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So before we move on to the business part, any passions outside of work?
Yeah, I try to. I mean, work tends to be all-encompassing, but no, there's a lot of good things that we like to get involved in. I mean, originally, I'm, as you can probably tell, from the States, so living in Southeast Asia has been a fantastic experience for the last 8 years.
All right.
Yeah, love sort of traveling in the region. It's always great discoveries to be had. I'm pretty active outdoors and sort of in terms of fitness, so rock climbing and diving, tennis, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. First, the obvious question, what inspired the idea for MyDoc?
Yeah, no, great question. So just a quick backdrop of my journey and how I got here. As you sort of did a great job introducing the listeners to my origins. I moved to Asia in 2008 initially on the venture capital side. So I was actually working as an investor, looking at healthcare investments in the region. So initially based in Singapore, but focused on India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines to some extent. So for me, it was a phenomenal experience to really get on the ground, get a sense of what was going on in the healthcare arena. Our mandate for our fund was really focused around primary care. So in that sense, we were looking at primary care facilities, outpatient, diagnostics, and pharmacy. And, over 4 years of time, our model for our fund was actually quite unique in the sense that, unlike most investment funds, we were a sort of entrepreneurially led organization. So instead of investing in pre-existing businesses, we like to look at opportunities from a larger perspective and actually start and incubate companies on our own with our own capital. So in a sense, I got a chance at really starting almost 5 companies within that fund before moving on to my own. So I think it's an interesting sort of hybrid. So I started off as an investor, but then as an investor was sort of a kind of a captive entrepreneur. And I guess they call it an EIR, an entrepreneur investment.
Okay, got it.
And then shifted out to MyDoc. Yeah.
Okay. And what's the vision for MyDoc?
Yeah, so MyDoc, I think, so just to kind of to complete the loop there, having spent almost 4 years with the fund, looking at these opportunities, the thing that really struck me, which was a commonality across very different countries, was the fact that the fragmentation for the end user was pretty immense. If you're a typical person in any of those countries trying to consume care, you are inevitably the person who has to orchestrate that care. And as my background as a physician, you're struck by the fact that oftentimes patients who are obviously trying to do the best for themselves or their families are not really well equipped to be able to orchestrate a lot of complexity. And yet that's what they're asked to do. Like they're asked to go and, you go see a GP who gives you sort of scribble down instructions in terms of follow-ups. Then you're asked to go off and, fill a prescription. The pharmacist talks to you. And so there's all these different stakeholders that are very critical for your care, but no one's really coordinating that conversation.
Okay.
And so the patient sort of gets left behind and ends up having, I think, less than an ideal, not just experience, but ultimately it affects their outcomes, right? So, it's very important, the mantra amongst medical practitioners is, evidence-based medicine. How do you actually make sure that the interventions that you're giving a particular person are sort of driving toward a good goal?
Okay.
So MyDoc really was designed from the ground up to appeal to how do we make it easier for the end user to orchestrate their care in a way that they become, though they're the drivers of their care, they're actually receiving the care in a much simpler, easier to navigate manner than leaving them to fend for themselves.
Okay, great. And who were the key people to take this project off the ground? I mean, you have, I think, one more co-founder, Vas, right? So,
Correct.
I mean,
Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just go ahead. I mean, it was just two of you all initially, or?
Yeah, so I mean, it was interesting. I stepped off from my fund after 4 years.
Okay.
After we had a team there, and I started looking around. Like, this idea was in my head, but it was not really formed completely. And I sort of linked up with a common friend here in Singapore, who, when I was sort of bouncing ideas off, I said, "Hey, you need to talk to my friend, Dr. Voss. He's sort of like you. In a way, we're quite unique, and
Okay.
that you don't see many physicians that end up turning into. I mean, I think you're seeing more now, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
But back, it's still relatively uncommon for physicians to become entrepreneurs. But Dr. Voss actually had already left. So he's a radiologist by training, but he left to set up the teleradiology business. And so we caught up over coffee one day, through our sort of intro, and started really bouncing ideas off each other. And it turned out that we both had come to a similar conclusion that, in 2008, this was back in 2012, 2011 is when we first met.
Okay.
That the rise of digital was really taking off, even in Asia. Obviously, the U.S. had already sort of moved into that space. WhatsApp, chats, all those sort of things were starting to move in a meaningful manner. And we said, you know what? It could be a very simple solution initially to really connect all of the stakeholders in this outpatient ecosystem with a product that could sort of make it easy for the end user to navigate. So then we started to really get excited, saying, hey, this is something that would actually potentially work. It would dovetail nicely with both the, sort of the increase in aging population, so people needing care away from, physical facilities, as well as the rising penetration of digital, mobile, other sort of tech in people's lives.
Okay.
So that's sort of how we got together, and I think since then it's really been a very sort of fruitful partnership.
Great. And when you first thought of the idea, how did you validate it? Did you just straight go to beta, do an MVP, or did you just test it out with people first, or?
Yeah. So I think, one of the benefits of being physicians is that our network was pretty good.
Yes, okay.
So that's one element. The other thing is both of us are, we're not spring chickens, so to speak. So we've been on the block for a bit. So we were able to benefit from our own personal networks.
Okay.
And so what we would do is we would, like, not a classic A/B test, but we'd go out to stakeholders, ask them, our friends, say, listen, here's our concept. What do you think about it? Then we get feedback. We'd iterate, go back, get feedback, iterate. And so with this constant iterative process, we started to see something come to take shape and really, really start to grow its own wings to move forward.
Okay. And so I've been through the product a bit. So you have many features like online results, secure data, remote consults, team messaging, e-referrals, etc. It's like a two-part question. So first, how does the end user use it, and what are the benefits for the end user?
Yep.
And secondly, how does the physician or that side of the business use it, and benefits for them also?
Yeah, perfect. So I think from the end user's perspective, it really boils down to them having at their fingertips access to their most commonly used data points for healthcare. Okay. So in other words, we really wanted to sketch out a system where someone could go in, and mind you, the system works for both acute and chronic conditions. But I think one of the better sort of use cases will be focused on chronic. But a patient could come in, get diagnosed, would be able to then be managed with an online caregiver, which could then move to a treatment plan, which may include both sort of pharmaceutical or pharmacological interventions, along with a sort of online disease management programs. And so the end user really, the design, there's a lot of complexity in terms of like the stakeholders and the ecosystem partners that we have to work with. But to the end user, it's a really stripped down interface. It's really about being able to sort of have a communication with each one of these people and having a clear sense of how that works. On the provider side, there's I think two angles that are pretty important. One is to really simplify the, I would say, almost barrage or overwhelming numbers of demands on a practitioner's time that the new tech tools have done. So, almost universally, when we talk to our doctor friends, they complain about the fact that, I want to be a good physician. I obviously care about my patients and I want to be engaged. But with the rise of WhatsApp and chat and phone numbers, patients are starting to really invade their sort of private time. And I mean, which, the reality is everyone needs sort of their own time, and, they can't be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so what we were able to do is create a system where the physicians, and not just physicians, but other caregivers from nurses to allied health, can create a system for their patients where they are available sort of, and we call it off office hours. So but they get to set the time, and they'll create a profile. Say, okay, I'll have office hours from 12 to 4 p.m. And what we found is that most patients actually really like that fact. In other words, they don't need to be available 24 hours a day, as long as the patients feel like, hey, my provider actually is sort of making that effort to be reachable outside of his clinic or his or her clinic. That's actually that's really meaningful in terms of an engagement point for the end user. And it has obviously the benefit to the provider that, okay, now I can sort of block off that time, on a Saturday afternoon where I can sort of take Q&A from patients and feel like they can reach out to me without being bombarded all the time. That's one angle. The second angle is it also allows them to monetize to some extent those interactions. When you have the previous system where they're using phone calls or SMS, it's very hard for a doctor who's obviously, at the end of the day, we care about our patients, but it's a business.
Of course,
right? They can't really monetize it because there's really no way to track all of that information because it's coming at you. It's 10 different channels. Now it's very clear. There's an audit. You know exactly when you've had those conversations. You can actually sort of trace those conversations, and you can charge for them in most places. So I think it becomes a twofold benefit for the providers as well.
Okay, and so y'all are in Singapore only now.
No, so we're actually have expanded pretty quickly. We're Singapore based, but we've already done projects in Malaysia. We're launching in Sri Lanka, and then we're already scoping out work further abroad in the Philippines, Hong Kong, and other markets as well. So I think with our model, we're looking to scale at a relatively rapid clip.
Great. And in terms of how does the competition pan out? I mean, you have a lot of. I know in India you have quite a few products like this, which does the patient-doctor interaction. In terms of this market, is there lots? I have not seen many. So
so I think the one thing to really drive home about MyDoc and why I think we really our sort of USP or our key differentiation is that we've been around for 3 years, and I fundamentally believe that the only way that online care is really going to take off is if you can provide an online experience that's, at least from a feature perspective, as rich as the offline experience. What I mean by that is that if you look at the development of a lot of digital health sort of companies, some of whom they're all very good, run by very talented entrepreneurs, but a lot of them sometimes focus very deep on a vertical. So, for example, you'll have a company that only does video chats with doctors. You may have another company that's building an e-commerce engine for pharmacies. At the end of the day, as a patient, you really just want to go to one place where you can get the advice, you can consume the product to make you better, and then sort of manage your payments as well. So our real vision is actually is broader than that. We really want to bring in the sort of trusted stakeholders into our system and to our platform and actually help integrate all of it. And I think that is relatively unique. There aren't a whole lot of, I know every entrepreneur thinks that their company is the best thing since sliced bread and all that. And we all have to sort of believe that. But I think, our go-to-market is relatively unique because of that. And so from a competitive landscape, I think it's a huge market. I think competition obviously makes all of us much richer and better in terms of our experience for our end users. But I think from what we can tell at this point, the way that we're trying to do it, and it's not a necessarily easy way of doing it, to be honest, is relatively unique.
Okay. In terms of funding, I think the first you did a seed with August Capital and Spring Seeds, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Any round after that, or you're on the road for next round?
Yeah, so we've actually, we've been raising some capital from some investors as well.
Okay.
And I think we're just sort of taking it as needed basis.
Oh, okay. And it's mainly for product?
Yeah, for everything. I mean, I think we're growing the organization. We were obviously trying to hire talented people that sort of share our vision.
Correct.
On the same journey. So yeah.
Okay. And what's your team size currently?
It sort of fluctuates. I can't. So the number can be anywhere between 15 to 22, depending on who's like sort of working on our projects.
Okay.
But we're growing as we start to bring in more people, both on the sort of sales, marketing, as well as the core product development side. So.
Okay. So you have some key customers like key partners. Like Acumed, Guardian, Connexion, etc. Like any more coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have some pretty exciting announcements in the next couple of, I'd say, next several weeks.
Okay. Where
you'll see some real sort of larger partners come on board. So, stay tuned.
Okay. Key challenges faced by startups in Singapore, in your view?
I think there's a couple. I mean, I think this is a phenomenal country to be based in for a lot of innovation in Asia. I mean, it's obviously very easy to do business here, set up companies, all that. I think this is not necessarily a Singapore problem or a difficulty. I think it's always tricky to be able to work as a startup in a sort of a complex industry like healthcare. So, I mean, I think to be able to sort of work with large giant companies that have been around, build their trust and that sort of thing can be complicated. I think people say this all the time. We've been lucky because we have a phenomenally talented team. But I think in terms of being able to acquire tons of talent, it can be a little bit more challenging because it's just a smaller market, right? I mean, if I was sitting in Silicon Valley, you throw a rock and you'd hit a It doesn't work that way necessarily in Southeast Asia. So I think that's one. That's another piece. And I also think I think the startup ecosystem here is newer and younger than it is in other parts of the world, like my native U.S., where you have a lot more mentorship and you've got a lot more sort of built-in support for entrepreneurs. I think the government here has done an absolute bang-up job actually building as much as they can to help support entrepreneurship. But it's still early days, right? And so I think we'll see how it all turns out. But obviously, I've made my home here because I really believe in the market and believe in the potential.
So moving out of business, who would you say influenced you most in life?
I think that's a tough one. I've had several mentors as I've grown up. People I've looked up to. Everyone from a college professor to one of my professors in law school, who all sort of really helped shape my worldview. And I think my background I've taken a journey, as I like to put it, through both academia and now even through my professional career. But both of those two mentors in particular really took a strong view of that. You really only become you're a summation of your experiences, and the more experiences you can have, as long as they're not just scattershot, which I don't think is constructive, they really do help define not only what you finally feel is your real calling in life, but they also help you have the skills required to be successful in those different endeavors, right? Correct. So I think that's really sort of shaped the way that I look at things and how I look at opportunities. Can I bring to bear some of the different skills and experiences that I've had to date to really help sort of push that problem or make some things work where things haven't worked in the past.
Okay. And what would be some of the best advice that you received?
Best advice. Good question, actually. Like I said, I've had a lot. I'd go back to what I said. I mean, at the risk of repeating myself, I think really sort of soak in any experience. Especially entrepreneurship, right? I'm sure you've talked to tons of entrepreneurs who've said, the road is hard. It's a struggle. I mean, but, and it's also almost cliched to say that struggle defines you and it sort of makes you better, that grit is all, resilience and all that. But I think that only works if you're really you're like almost sort of soaking in that experience, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it really helps define and makes the path for you clearer ahead. So that was one of the sort of foundational experiences that one of my mentors sort of gave me. Really don't, you may get frustrated at times in what you're doing, but you've really got to stop. You've got to think about it. You've got to you've got to soak in that experience. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Okay. So during your, corporate life, when did you realize that, okay, this wasn't it for you and it was entrepreneurship?
So like I said, sort of my evolution in that, it's a great question. I think it started off actually in clinical practice. So I actually had a chance. I was a practicing surgeon in one of the Harvard hospitals. So you're at the top of the profession, really, really cool, an amazing sort of institution. Mm-hmm. But I remembered like at some point, walking out of an operating room. I was just an intern, sort of early first year resident. But I remember walking out of a case being like, wow, that was a lot of fun. I'm exhausted, but it was fun. But then you go into the family's room and they're just like, oh my gosh, thank you, doctor. You like took care. It's maybe it's a hernia or something. Nothing like you're not life threatening. But it's amazing that you could sort of like go in, fix someone, and like walk out after an hour and a half or 2 hours. But for me, like even though those are obviously gratifying experiences, it really sort of said, look, what it called to me was like I really feel like I can sort of make an impact on a greater stage. Sort of do things that could have effects and positive effects on multitudes of people as opposed to, one by one. Not to ever take away what the arts that, practicing physicians do. I mean, I have tons of friends, family, they're all practicing doctors. And I do miss parts of the medical world.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in healthcare from a policy perspective, from a business model perspective. And I felt that at least for me, I would be more energized and sort of trying to go for those bigger sort of pieces.
Okay. And any low point in your entrepreneurial career till now where you just wanted to completely give up?
You ask me that question every other day, and then I'll probably give you an answer like right now. No, I mean, look, I think there are days when you wake up and you're like, oh, okay, maybe this didn't go right, or like you lost a contract you thought you had in the bag, or a fundraise that you thought was like pretty much done. The investor comes back, says, "Look, we can't do it right now," or whatever it is, and it's all happened to us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just part of the journey. But yeah, there are tons of days when you wake up and you're like, you know what? If I just stayed a surgeon at a top hospital, I'll be making a lot more money right now than what I'm doing right now, which is essentially just bootstrapping or like doing nothing.
Correct.
But you can't let that stuff. I mean, you can't let it get to you, or you can sort of think you keep your eye on the prize and you keep just kind of going for it, right?
Correct.
And knowing that in your heart you feel like what you're doing will have the ability to have a positive effect on a multitude of people. It would not happen otherwise.
Correct. And Dr. Snehal's greatest weakness would be?
My greatest weakness, probably impatience.
Okay.
Which is sort of typical, I guess. And I love weak questions about weaknesses that are actually like disguised strengths. So, I mean, it's impatience, and I know that actually is a true weakness at times. Like you have to sometimes, like my mentor said, you have to stop, smell the roses, let the experience, stew in the experience.
Yeah.
It conditions you like it conditions, anything you cook, and you have to sort of think about it that way. But you have to like everyone tells you to take your weaknesses and try to make them into strengths.
Yeah. And anything at present that's getting you really excited? Any new launch or features coming up?
There's actually a ton. I mean, we've made some really amazingly cool things that are in this next iteration of the product, which will come out in the next several weeks and months.
Okay.
And I think we've built a system that can actually scale and manage a lot of conditions that would be hard to do otherwise.
Okay. And where do you see yourself and your business, let's say, in the next 2 to 3 years?
I mean, we'd like to be, Pan-Asian, like really be a solution from, all around this region, and hopefully providing quality sort of care as the region sort of continues to develop, and providing those services that right now are very difficult for, the end user to receive. I think that's where we would love to be.
Okay. And finally, to a part of the show, which is a quick fire round. Quick one-word answers, okay?
Okay.
When people ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that?
I don't. I say I don't know. That's what I say.
Okay. When you think of the word successful, who's the first person that comes to mind?
This is a really weird answer, but I would say Thomas Jefferson. I can't. I don't know why I said that, but okay. I did.
What do you excel at that people might not realize?
I'm actually pretty good tennis player.
Okay. What is something you believe in that other people think is insane?
Wow. That I think a startup can actually. This is okay. That a startup can revolutionize healthcare.
Okay. And your favorite city worldwide?
Favorite city worldwide. Oh, I want to have to give a shout out to New York City because that's where I spent the last 12 years. That's saying I love my adopted hometown of Singapore, but yeah, New York.
New York is New York.
Yeah.
And finally, one last thought or piece of advice that you may have missed that you want to give our aspiring founders.
I think it's a good question. I mean, I'm trying to avoid the cliches because everyone hears the same stuff, right? So That's not really all that helpful. I actually think instead of running away from your weaknesses or your negative points, I think it goes, and once again, sort of there's a theme here, right? It circles back to what my mentor told me. Like, I think you need to really, as painful as it can be, you really need to sort of soak in those losses, soak in the hits, let it, cry it out, whatever it is. Like, you really have to let the emotions get to you, because if you try to avoid them, my own theory is that it doesn't help you, right? I mean, even bad things, like you lose a contract, your company goes belly up, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Like, I think you've just got to, it's not a question of just picking yourself up and getting back on the horse. I think that's not really self-serving. I think you've got to wallow in it a bit. And that's sort of like, that's not what you hear oftentimes, but you've got to sit there and you've got to cry it out. You've got to like lie in that puddle and just, and feel sorry for yourself a bit,
Yeah.
But I think that's how you'll start to get perspective. And I think that's the thing that's really hard for most entrepreneurs. We live and die what we do. And it's very hard for us to see the forest for the trees. And I think the universe is always talking to you in some level. And if you really absorb those lessons, you'll become richer for it. That's my sort of advice.
Okay.
Sort of can be a Debbie Downer note, but I think it's important because we're all going to go through it. So it doesn't.
And please let our listeners know how they can reach you and MyDoc.
Yeah, sure. Just so like you mean like sort of my contact details?
Yeah, anything. Even if Twitter is okay, whatever.
Yeah, so I'm sort of not a social media hound, so to speak. So my email address is my name.last name at mydoc.com.
Okay. And again, Snehal, thanks for taking the time to talk to us and inspiring our listeners to start their own ventures, and all the very best at building and scaling MyDoc.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, listeners, thanks a lot. Do visit mydoc.com and visit us at theasianentrepreneur.com to get the show notes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. Our hope is that you are encouraged by what you've heard, and you can put these same concepts and mindsets to use with your own style. See you next time as we discover more about what it takes to be an accomplished entrepreneur. In the meantime, head over to theasianentrepreneur.com and check out show notes and other information to motivate you in your entrepreneurial endeavors.